Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Hey, good day. How are you today?
I'm fine. What about you?
Doing not too bad, not too bad.
Thank you for attending our rapid fire session. So, I will ask some questions.
Okay, sure. I
Okay.
am ready.
So, my first question is what inspired you to write this amazing book?
Okay. Um, well, it's kind of funny uh, that the question includes the word inspired, or maybe it's very fitting, I think, because really I've written a lot of stuff. I mean, behind me here, this is a room where I do a lot of writing, and there's literally boxes of stuff that I've written over the years. I've never published anything, but I mean, I've been writing for years and years, and some stuff's on the computer actually, but yeah, there's actually old notes written, and basically I compiled or accumulated pieces of the new mythologies over many years or decades, and other works too. And then at some point, I guess I started going through a lot of this stuff. There were some deeply inspired ideas and some just conjectures, things, like essays and even some prayers, I kind of had written down. And then I kind of sometimes I'll say with this book, herein I have bared my soul, or at least the better part of it, because a lot of the stuff in there is not maybe stuff that you talk about every day. You think about it sometimes, but so basically, after accumulating the stuff, I kind of ended up having some free time, and I went through all this information and before for inclusion, and I put things into sort of different books, and some of them were more like stories, but this was more of a kind of a philosophical thing. So the criteria for including into the new mythologies was that if the topic was anything that was either inspired, anything I remember, wow, I felt really inspired at the time when I wrote this, or anything I thought was somewhat inspirational, like that would be of a good benefit to the reader. So basically, after I compiled all this stuff, I found that there was really a kind of a common theme, throughout, kind of interwoven. And then, strangely enough, I felt inspired to publish this book, so I'd written a lot, but I'd never published, and I truly did. So the word inspired gets interwoven in this a lot. I had books that were more emotional, and so I didn't decide to publish my most negative, emotional charged topics, or even some of my better, like, storied events, things that could have been maybe a little more interesting. None of my most humorous, some of my more humorous stuff, which I do actually have a sense of humor, very, very small, but I have one. And, it wasn't my cool stories like maybe Johnny and Susie versus the vampires and the space aliens. It wasn't any of those. It was, of all that stuff, I felt inspired to publish this stuff in the new mythology. So long answer, but there you go.
Okay, great. So, what's the key message in your book?
Okay, well, that's a deep one, and it's kind of long. So, and I thought we might talk about that. So I made a few notes. So I hope if I, don't look too much like I'm talking down, but there are a lot of concepts that are addressed in the book, and often, rather than just stating them, they're more or less illustrated in the new mythologies. So not really illustrated with pictures, but illustrated with words. So it wasn't like that there's like a straight outline to the book. And I thought about it, a little bit in answering this question, that that we would, that I maybe should have put it out there more. Maybe I should have put more of an outline, or clarified or explicated upon some of these topics. So there are kind of four general themes that I think may have been outlined, and I'm going to do like a little blog or something on this stuff too, and it's like an addendum to the book. So the first one is that we cannot really, with clarity, know the exact origins of our the exact nature of our origin, and more specifically, whether that origin was of divine or conscious design, is what I like to talk about, or whether it's or whether it was due to some it's a random series of events. We just happen to be here. Either way, you can trace things back and you can read a lot of old, you know, narratives and things, but they're kind of, it's uncertain. I mean, rationally speaking, we can't know those things. But then regardless of those, and this is still part of the first one, regardless of those, and maybe in spite of the lacking nature of some of these dusty old teachings or new scientific narratives, our existence in the here and now is still miraculous if we begin to look at it that way. And in some ways, it's even more miraculous because of the lack of those capabilities to pin any of that down. In other words, what's truly amazing is our conscious awareness existing within this miraculous reality in the here and now. It's a juxtaposition of awareness, which is like a gem set within a physical reality, which is like a ring. And that juxtaposition, it's just so, it's just so a certain way. And I describe this in the book as a miracle witnessing a miracle. So this miraculous aspect of our conscious present within the material aspect of an awe-inspiring present is of far greater significance than any backstory or origin story. And so our conscious position within the present, oriented toward the future, this is of great significance. So that's the first that sounds like a lot, but that's just the first one. The next ones are a little more to the point or follow from that. So the second one is that basically that as we manifest this consciousness in the now, whether or not it arises from a greater form of pre-existing consciousness, or whether we are merely contributing to a more future forward form of greater consciousness, either way, it is fundamentally good. In other words, imperfect, yes, but fundamentally good. It's somewhat broken, but essentially awesome. And it's capable of further refinement and extrapolation. So I think too, we should be forever empowered by this understanding. So the first two kind of empower us as we move through them. So then third is that just as we are empowered by that understanding, we also find that we are likewise empowered with the capacity for action, planning, and direction. So we can, in this powerful consciousness tethered to this presence, we can act upon our own consciousness, and we can even act upon, amazing as it may, as fundamental as it sounds, we can act upon the physical world. What an amazing thing that is. This is actually, even though it's common everyday, experience, it's much more exciting and fluid worldview, compared to a strictly rigid scriptural notion, or maybe any stale scientific materialistic notion, which often imply that things are put into place and then that we are just passive entities. This more lucid idea, as illustrated within the new mythologies, I think instead it reckons that we have a genuine impact upon outcomes and bearing upon direction within and upon this, our very malleable present, like metal is molded. And I think this malleable present gives the conscious entity and greater consciousness this most awesome attribute. And it's almost like a task of continuously and directionally forwarding the very act of creation. So, and then fourth from that, and this one's quick, we can determine that we can progress individually and collectively by focusing upon that which is truthful and beneficial. So once we know that we can act upon things and that our actions have real meaning, both internally and externally, this number four, even though it's very short, it is an area for maybe a whole nother book or for people to think about. But simply by the act of thinking about, and focusing upon what might be truthful versus false, and what might be within that truthful, what is the beneficial part of what might be truthful rather than the negative, we can then progressively go toward that which is better. So that's kind of, that leaves you on the cliffhanger of, well, yeah, there's a lot you can do within that fourth realm.
Audience will understand what you want to convey to the audience.
Yes, and that's pretty much, that's pretty much where that's the best summary I can give of like an outline of some of the points that are kind of touched on, maybe not in that order, but that are revisited time and again in different ways in the book. In other words, sometimes there's a prayer, which kind of expresses my feelings toward a,
Yeah.
uh, greater consciousness, God, and there's other parts where it maybe goes through it a little more like an essay, and then there's other parts where it's more like conjecture, just talking about, what about this and what about that, sort of thing. So anyway, and like I say, these are thoughts that we sometimes don't, I think a lot of us have these thoughts, but I've never seen many people write them out in that way. Maybe they're a little too personal in some cases, but there it is.
Okay. So, what's the most common misconception about self-help?
About self-help, well, first off, I just wanted to clarify that the new Mythologies doesn't cleanly fall into the self-help category. We had a little trouble with this in publishing, figuring out which category it's in, because it checks off the self-help box, but it's also falls kind of into categories of like philosophy or metaphysics,
Yeah.
and even religion. And of course, as mentioned, there's a category known as inspirational. And so, but in my opinion, anything that's inspirational could, automatically be seen as helping oneself. So self-help it is. And so now what was the question is,
What was the most misconception about self-help?
the most common misconception is basically that that basically a self-help, some people I think believe that a self-help has to be very structured and like a step-by-step process like this, and so basically the new Mythologies is in no way, making out an exacting step-by-step process, and nor is it what I call prescriptive in nature. Instead, it really presents a wide-eyed and open-ended, worldview in which many barriers can be surpassed or overcome. So it yields a worldview which is expansive and relatively unrestricted. So it's definitely not a cookie cutter type of self-help book.
Okay, so if you could only give one advice, so what would it be?
Well, yeah, and there again, if I can only give one piece of advice, and for me that's always hard, because I mean it's always hard to boil life down to just one thing, and there's other books things where I write about this, and I talk about how our minds, I'm going a little beyond what I had originally intended to say, but our minds have this sort of subconscious desire to want to have just a one thing, and then it's like we might feel like I have this one thing and now I can just relate, I'm never gonna have to worry about anything else again. But it's just, life is not really that way. So I think there is always going to be complexity and a multiplicity of ideas and thoughts and areas where we have these realizations. But basically, yeah, if I had to narrow it down to one thing, it would probably be those four things that we said earlier. So that's basically that we can recognize and confirm the miraculous and awesome nature of our own awareness, experiencing this reality in which we abide. And that from that, we recognize that we are not merely passive entities in this experience, but rather we can reflect upon and then act upon our consciousness, and moreover upon reality itself. And then from that we learn that by emphasizing what is beneficial and true, that we can progressively forge a greater and better form of reality. So consciousness, our own very good consciousness, becomes a key element in the expansive and ever malleable future. So saying the same thing again, but trying to make it a little short.
So, is there a specific audience you had in mind while you're writing a book?
A specific audience? Well, I'll say yes. And I'm going to keep this one short since we're running out of time. So when I was writing this book, I was concerned about the parts of the book. I was always concerned about the nature of consciousness itself, which is some philosophers think about, and also concerned very personally with my own conscious orientation to God and the universe. I was kind of reflecting upon what is the relationship between my own inner self and the universe.
Yeah.
And then, but in the act of publishing this book, I had a much more specific audience in mind, and that was the human race. So, yeah,
Okay.
maybe that's not too specific, but pretty broad.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for joining our rapid fire session and thank you for giving us your precious time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate it. I love the opportunity of working with White Falcon Publishing. You guys have
Thank
been
you.
great.
Thank you so much. And all the best for your book.
Okay, say again, sorry.
All the best for your book.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll see what happens.
Okay.